Yo, what is up? Welcome to Ninja Geek Games. Around this time last year, I posted a video on my favourite light solo card games, and I'll put a link to that at the end of this video. In this episode, we're going to look at dice games that can be played solo. Why solo, you ask? Well, if you lose, no one will know. Plus, I still have no friends. Now, these aren't the top 5 games ever. These are just games that I've been playing and enjoying recently during lockdown. So let's get this rolling. A little pun for you there. They're to die for. Rolling in at number 5 is Tavern, set in the Five Realms universe. Tavern is a hidden tavern in a cavern run by a nasty dwarf called Nasty the Dwarf. In this game, you take on the role of a bar worker serving drinks to thirsty heroes after a hard day slaying monsters and hoarding treasure, in an attempt to score as many victory points as possible. As you can see, the game comes with a lot of components and this really cool looking board. You've got the mess hall where the punters can order their drinks. The cellar is where you can gain ingredients, and the kitchen and the chore board are areas where you can gain victory points, ingredients and reputation on specific tracks. For the AI, you'll roll different coloured die and place them on specific areas on the board. These then block actions for that particular round. Once done, you'll then be able to roll your own pool of dice and begin your turn. During the game, the first thing you'll need to do is place your meeple at one of the tables in the mess hall. That then allows you to claim one of the orders. You then place your time marker on the current round of the clock. That will enable you to track how long it takes to make that order. The order is placed on your player mat. It gives a list of ingredients that you'll need to make the drink, as well as the number of victory points you'll gain for making that drink, depending on how long it takes. In order to make your drink, you'll need to place your pool of rolled dice in various areas of the tavern to collect ingredients, items and potions. Some action spaces require just a specific number of dice, where others need the exact value of the sum of any dice placed there. The cellar provides a choice of ingredients that you can take in order to make your drink. Whereas mentioned, both the kitchen and the chore board give victory points, ingredients, and allow you to adjust your reputation on specific tracks on your player board. When placing die on the chore board or in the kitchen, you're able to adjust your reputation on those tracks accordingly. These provide you with victory points as well as special actions that allow you to increase or decrease the number of pips on your die. Placing die at the Wizard's Workshop allows you to gain magic potions that can be used to replace any ingredient from your order list, as well as gaining sneaky items that allow you to steal ingredients from another player, swap ingredients from your orders, and changing the result of rolled die, to name a few. Depending on AI dice placement during the game, it's likely that at some point you will be moving up this nasty track. Be warned that this does 2 things. Firstly, it will give you negative points at the end of the game. And secondly, landing on these images will force you to take a nasty card, which all have some negative effect from returning ingredient cards to their stacks or moving back up your chore tracks. The game also comes with an expansion that includes a sideboard to the secret cellar, but I'm not sure if that's available in retail version or a Kickstarter version only. Anyway, this is just an extra area where you can place die to gain ingredients, reputation, as well as some special tokens that can be used in the game. Once you've collected all the ingredients that you'll need, you can score big victory points. You'll need to assess the time you collected the order against the time of the current round. However, take too long making the drink and you'll gain less victory points. And if you make the customer wait too long, you'll actually gain negative points. I mean, nobody wants a warm, raging grog. In solo play, the AI randomly blocks action spaces on the board, preventing you from placing dice there. Tavern is a light, fun dice placement game with simple rules and a beat-your-own-score system. There is a story mode variant where you're provided with an assignment that details objectives you must complete during the game that I think should be used for solo play. The components are good and the artwork is similar to all the other games in the same universe, which is not a bad thing. This is a good entry-level dice game, or if you're looking for something not too taxing or heavy. However, I like this game, love the theme, and it does play up to 6 players as well. Next up is Sigrada. This is a dice drafting puzzle game where you get to use dice to construct a beautiful stained glass window following specific rules and restrictions to do so. There are 5 colours of die and each pip supposedly represents a different shade of that colour, which is pretty cool. Let's take a closer look. At the start of the game, you'll select one of these double-sided window patterns to slot into the player board where dice need to be placed. In the solo play, you'll draw 4 die from the bag, roll them, and then get 2 turns to draft die. Now, the die you select and where you place them on your player board depends on both its colour and number of pips it shows, as placing die onto your player board window follows very specific rules. Now, this player board appears as it would mid-game. However, for your very first draft, the dice must be placed along the edge of your board. In all future drafts, dice must be placed adjacent to those already placed, although this does include diagonally. Simple enough? Not quite, my friend. As you've noted, the window pattern shows areas of various colours or pips. Now, when selecting die, any colour or any number of pips can be placed on the white squares. Now, for the remaining coloured areas or the grey areas showing the number of pips, you must match dice to that space if you want to place it. So, for instance, in this case, any coloured die showing a number 5 can be placed in these 2 spots, so I can place this yellow die here. And this die can be of any colour as long as it shows 5 pips. However, in these areas, you must match the exact colour regardless of pips. So for instance, this blue square, I can place this blue 3. Not only that, it's important to note that dice of the same colour or number cannot be placed adjacent to each other, again ignoring diagonals. And this becomes a real pain in the glass. Yep, there's another pun. So as well as not being able to place this red die in any of these areas here, because this die doesn't match the number of pips or colours, I'm also unable to place a purple die here because there are 2 colours that match adjacent, or here, even though this is a purple square, because there are now 2 adjacent die, both showing 2 pips. Doing this causes you to lose points at the end of the game. Now, during each round, there'll always be 2 die left over after drafting. At the end of the turn, are placed on the round track without altering the number of pips. At the end of the game, the total value of all die becomes your score target, therefore changes with each game. So, how do we score points during the game? Well, during setup, you'll reveal a number of objective cards here that show how points are scored each game. These include placing die of a specific colour, or groups of numbers, or placing die in particular patterns, to name a few. And there are a number of these cards, so your tactics will vary each game. Also, each game allows you to use tool cards to perform special actions and bend the rules, but their use is limited. The game ends after 10 rounds, after which you'll hopefully have filled your window pattern. If you spot any mistakes, you'll have to remove those dice now. That can be costly as you'll lose victory points. Now, this game provides a great puzzle of drafting and placing die that has high replay value due to the variety of window patterns, each with their own levels of difficulty, objectives for scoring and tools. The components are amazing and it's very satisfying feeling to complete your window whilst trying to fit in the scoring objectives. There are also a couple of expansions available that add some elements to the game. When I first played this, I wasn't sure if I would like the theme as it just didn't sit with me. However, I really like this game and it really does challenge you to think about your options, push your luck a little and work out the puzzle that's been set before you. At number 3 is Proving Grounds from Renegade Game Studios. This is a little different from the others on the list as it's a true solitaire game from their Solo Hero series. I've completed a Learn to Play video for this, so you can check that out if you like as well. This is a real-time push your luck game that comes with an optional companion app. You take on the role of Mayor Strongheart, accused of murdering her mother and stand trial by combat. The aim of the game is to battle multiple opponents at the same time, lasting long enough to defeat 8 enemies. The setup for the base game is really simple. You place the encounter board in the centre of the table that represents the area where combat takes place. That includes Mayor Strongheart and numbered encountered areas 1 to 6. You'll shuffle the enemy deck and place 1 at each of the encounter areas, and each of those cards contains a wound marker. Your pool of die includes 5 white die and 3 coloured die, 1 of each green, yellow and blue. The remaining coloured die are placed on this area of the health track along with the health marker, and 3 white die are placed in the exhaustion track. At the beginning of each round, you'll roll your pool of attack die and separate the die into sets based on their number. So in this example, I have a set of 6s, a set of 4s, a set of 2s, and 2 singles, which are 3 and 5. Now during this stage, you can re-roll these dice as many times as you like within 1 minute, but there are a number of rules to follow. Firstly, you can only re-roll sets of die. You cannot re-roll singles. And when re-rolling, you can only re-roll one set at a time. So in this example, I could re-roll the sets of 4s, or 6s, or 2s, and I'll choose the 4s. And what this has done now is given me 3 singles and an additional die in the set of 6. I can then choose to re-roll these sets of 6, which has given me 3 2s, a set of 5s, and a set of 3s. I'm now left with 1 single. And I can keep re-rolling as many times as I like until I'm satisfied with the results, or 1 minute has passed. Renegade Game Studios also provide an app that includes a timer for this, as well as some cool sound effects. Once this stage is over, we then need to assign all these die to the encounter board, where each of these combat areas can only contain dice that match the number rolled. So in this instance, we assign all our die, so the sets of 2s go onto position 2, pair of 3s onto position 3, the single 4 here, and the set of 5s on position 5. And once this is done, we then need to check for wounds. To do this, you'll go in numerical order, assessing the dice placed in that area against any prerequisites or special abilities on the associated card. To score a hit against an enemy, you must have at least 2 die in that area. However, any combat area that contains single die means the enemy has scored a hit on you. So in position 1, there are no dice placed, meaning Maya nor the enemy take a hit. At position 2, our prerequisite of the enemy card indicates we need 3 or more die in that area. As we have 3 die, the enemy takes a hit. Now unfortunately at position 4, we've only placed a single, meaning the enemy scores a hit and we move the marker down 1 space. At position 5, we were successfully able to attack with a paired set, meaning the enemy wound marker goes up 1 space. Once that phase has been complete, you'll then check to see if enemies have been defeated or Maya has taken a hit herself. For an enemy to be defeated, their wound marker needs to reach the top of their wound track. Once that happens, you'll remove the card, place that in your victory area, and draw another card in its place. Meaning at all times in the game, you'll always be facing 6 enemies. Any of the wound markers drop to the bottom space of the card, it means that Maya has taken a wound and loses health. Now during the game, as Maya loses health and a marker moves down the health track, at some point, a marker will come into contact with these 3 die. If that happens, you shift them down 1 area, and you can select one of these coloured die for your dice pool. And it's always a good idea to check the enemy cards to see which colour would benefit you the most. If it moves again, you get to take another die. However, reach the last space and you lose the game. However, assuming that Maya is still alive and able to fight another battle, we take all spent die back to our pool area in order to start the round again. At some point in the game, you're also able to claim die from the exhaustion area to increase your pool of attack die. The game continues until Maya has lost all of her health, or she's able to defeat 8 enemies, in which case you win the game, where you've proved your innocence, the crowd go wild, and you can strut about saying, "Are you not entertained?" Now as the game continues, you may gain or lose dice through exhaustion, as well as gaining more coloured die as you lose health. Some of the enemies require a die of a specific colour to cause damage, so use wisely. During the rolling phase, you get this sense of urgency and panic that reflects the chaos of combat around you. There is a push your luck element as you desperately try to get rid of those singles, whilst at the same time try to get specific sets for hits. What's more, I've only described the training base game. This comes with 6 additional modules that can be added in any combination that include some great mechanics such as shields, chaotic dragon die, as well as one that introduces orientation of fight position, which is awesome. This is a great solo game with very high replay value and some awesome mechanics with a really cool theme. My number 2 spot is Role Player, which is based on a role-playing game, Character Creation. The game requires you to draft die to build your character's attributes and visit the market to buy weapons, armors, skills and traits in order to gain reputation. Even before the game begins, you get to select your character, their backstory and alliance, which is a really cool part of the game. So the setup for Role Player is a really fun part of the game where you get to select and build your character from scratch. You first select one of these character boards, choosing from elves, dwarves, humans and orcs, amongst others. Each of these character boards is actually double-sided, so you can choose male or female, and this has no game relevance, but it's a nice touch. You'll randomly be given a class card, which are double-sided, and you get to pick which side you want to be. And these class cards give you your attribute score that you'll need to meet with drafted dice, and they all have a unique special ability. Your backstory can provide bonus reputation if you can match the die colour to the respective attribute row and column. And your alignment can be shifted throughout the game that also provides reputation. So the aim of the game is to draft die into your attribute row and try and score as much reputation as you can. And we'll discuss how reputation is scored before we go through the finer points of the game. Each of the character boards has 6 attribute rows that include things like strength, dexterity, and for example. And your class card also lists these attributes. That also includes a score that you must meet by adding up the pips for that attribute row. So, to score 2 reputation in the attribute for wisdom, the sum of all die in this row at the end of the game must equal 15 or 16. You'll also gain bonus reputation at the end of the game for having dice of a specific colour in the exact area on your backstory card. And lastly, depending on how your alignment shifts during the game, this can give you positive or negative reputation. At the start of each round, you'll randomly draw 3 die from the bag, roll them, and put them in numerical order on these initiative cards. Bearing in mind that initiative card, number 2, gives you an additional gold. When drafting die, you'll select 1 die from the initiative and place it in any of the attribute rows on the far left. Once you've placed the die in a particular attribute row, you're able to take that special ability. So, as I've placed the die in the strength attribute row, I'm able to flip any die on my player board to its opposite side. Had I placed it in the dexterity row, I'd have been able to switch any 2 die on the board. During the game, you'll have the opportunity to buy cards from the market to enhance your character. These include armour, where multiple sets of the same type can provide extra reputation at the end of the game. Weapon cards that can give you special abilities. And skills that can help with dice placement, as well as shifting your alignment. The game ends when you filled up each slot within every attribute row. You'll then proceed to scoring reputation. As discussed, as well as scoring reputation from matching scores on your class card, matching coloured die on your backstory, and your alignment, as well as any sets of armours and traits you've picked up along the way, you'll also gain reputation for placing any die that match the colour of your class. Each of the character boards also has some positive and negative modifiers along the attribute rows, and these are different for each character. So as an example for the orc, although I've scored 14 for my strength attribute row, the orc also gets a +2 modifier for strength. Now I think this game has a really great theme. There are also a few expansions available that add additional cool mechanics too. Die drafting is important as using the die value can support building your attribute score, but colour and placement benefits backstory and which action is available to use. In solo play, market cards get discarded dependent on the die you take, and in multiplayer this actually grants initiative for being the first to choose market cards. Also, drafting gold die doesn't benefit your backstory but does provide additional gold for the market phase. The components are great, the artwork is pretty good too, and drafting does provide a really good puzzle element to the game. I think the expansions make a good game great, but the end game for solo play is really just to beat your own score. But this can be solved with Friends and Familiars expansion. Regardless, this deserves my number 2 spot. Last but not least, my number 1 solo dice game is Too Many Bones Undertow. This is a dice building RPG game where you take on the role of a gearlock and attempt to travel down a treacherous river fighting baddies that culminates in locating and battling a powerful tyrant. The first thing you need to do to know about this game is that it's a very heavy game when compared to the others that I've discussed today. There are lots of moving parts, lots of components and a 30-page rulebook. However, this is one of the most engaging solo games I own and would likely sit in my top 5 games regardless. So as you can see, there's a lot of content in the game. What you see here is just a portion of it. Now for each game, you'll choose one of the 5 tyrants and then create an encounter deck that provides a unique, different story each game. The game only comes with 2 gearlocks, which are Duster and Stanza, but each provides a vastly different playstyle with multiple ways to train, upgrade and progress following a skill tree. There are so many ways to train within each gearlock, that it's outside the scope of the video, but I do have another Too Many Bones video on some gearlock expansions that maybe have helped you. But just briefly, you can upgrade stats such as attack and defense that indicates the total number of those die that you can roll in combat. You also have a skill tree area for upgrades, where each of these slots is home for a unique die specific for that skill. So as you upgrade during the game, you can gain these skills in the form of die and place them in these slots. Each of these skills has a specific path that they'll need to follow. So in some circumstances, you'll need to upgrade die in a specific order. These here, highlighted in yellow, are consumables, which means they get a limited number of uses before they're exhausted. However, having access to these skills means nothing if your dexterity is low, as this number, plus the sum of any die placed here, dictates the number of die you can roll each combat turn, and the number of spaces that you can move in combat. This area up here is kind of like a reserve where you can store dice during combat, and any bones rolled in combat can be stored here and traded in for big special abilities. During the game, as you draw encounter cards, most of them will require you to resolve battle, and this is done on a double-sided battle map that represents a river raft on one side and land on the other. During battle, your gearlock and the baddies are represented by chips, with a stack of red health chips underneath. There are 5 classes of baddies, with subtypes within each of all varying difficulties. Before battle, there's a really cool mechanic to create a pool of baddies that you'll be facing during that battle. And there's also an initiative meter represented by these die that correspond to each gearlock or baddie, meaning you'll know the order of play before battle begins, but you really have to think well in advance about your actions. Depending on if you fight on land or on this raft, it provides a completely different experience, let alone the combination of baddies that you'll be fighting. These Krellin are fish-like monsters, and during battle can actually eat up areas of the board, reducing the number of spaces that you can move about on. As well as each gearlock having their own set of skills represented by die, where die can be placed on baddies to help you remember enemies have been affected by certain attacks. So in this instance, we know that this enemy has been affected by bleeding. However, the enemies can also utilise their own die, where for instance, if you've been poisoned, you'll have to place the die on your own gearlock. As well as training and levelling up, you'll also find some really cool equipment and loot as rewards during the game. These then become attached to your character that can provide some really awesome abilities to support your combat. Others come in the form of trove that require lock picking with these die, which adds a kind of push your luck element that can be puzzled out over several rounds, which is really fun to do. And these provide some really big rewards. During the game, as you progress through and complete encounters, you'll move down this map, where you'll then have a limited number of rounds to prepare yourself to fight the tyrant. Each tyrant is represented by its own chip with unique die. And the back of the tyrant card lists what baddies form the battle queue in addition to fighting the tyrant. The tyrant card also shows any skills they have and how they utilise their die. But you'll need to make sure you're properly prepared, because these tyrants provide some epic battles. Defeat the tyrant and you've won the game. So this game is huge. There is so much content it can be quite overwhelming at first. Deciding on how to train and which skills to unlock, or whether to increase battle stacks can cause some analysis paralysis. Plus, each skill is different, that also provides a different outcome depending on what you roll. However, the game comes with these excellent reference sheets that details everything you need to know in this area. The theme is so good, and each story really immersive and just develops brilliantly with a unique story and gameplay each game. Undertow is the 1 to 2 player game, but the big box base game plays up to 4 players. However, Chip Theory Games also provides loads of additional characters that increases this game up to 4 players. However, when playing solo, I always use 2 characters, although this does require you to know the characters very well. It's a very deep game, and as mentioned, it does require a little more investment in time to work out the game and to understand how each gearlock plays, but it's well worth it as it's so rewarding. So that's it, my top 5 dice games for solo play that I've been playing recently. If you haven't tried any, please do, and feel free to let me know if you agree with my choice or ask any questions in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel. This is Ninja Geek Games. Cheers.